Understanding what flood insurance covers if you have a property loss can be a challenge. So how do you report it, and how can it lead to a successful claim settlement? Well, even the wording you use when you make a claim can impact it. Here to help us sort all of this out is Dick Tutwiler, founder and CEO of Tutwiler and Associates. Great to have you back.
Well, thank you for having me back. I appreciate it.
What do property owners have to know about flood insurance, first of all?
Well, the flood program itself is run by the federal government. There are some private carriers that are getting into it, but for the most part, this is a federal program run by FEMA with some very strict rules and regulations. And it is a program that has a lot of controversy surrounding it. It was just re-upped the other day because they're so far in debt because of prior losses. But a lot of misconceptions are out there when people have water losses in their house and they think that it's a flood when in fact it may be a water loss that's covered. Flood is very specific about what they cover, and just if you read the flood policy, it has to have 2 adjoining properties or so much land before it's actually considered a flood. So you may have a flood outside of your house, but based on the language in the policy, it may not be covered. So people need to read their policies and get some sense about what is in that policy and know the difference between a flood and a water loss. A water loss in a house is a whole different another thing than a flood loss.
I would think water loss, would that have something to do with your plumbing and pipes?
Absolutely.
And a flood would be a
flood would be from outside your
Right.
property that the water is coming in. That would be a flood. So you could have a water loss from somebody else's, or a flood from somebody else's property that comes into your house that may not be covered under your flood insurance policy because of the definition of a flood.
How do people know if they even need it? People in Houston were told you don't need flood insurance, and now they're still cleaning up from Hurricane Harvey.
Houston was a unique situation because of the geographic location. They had not had floods there. It was not in a flood zone, and you had this massive tropical storm that caused all this water to spread out. Unfortunately, Houston doesn't have very good zoning laws, so homes were flooded that normally would not have been flooded but for Harvey. So people, unfortunately woke up and found out they had this flood loss and there's no coverage for it because they didn't buy a flood insurance policy. Very bad situation in Houston.
What if the damage occurs from both wind and flood? Are you covered?
That's a great question. And it's one that's debated continually in our world because wind is going to be covered under your homeowner's policy, flood under a flood policy. So the question that we see is which came first, the wind or the flood? And a good example of this was a case I had some years ago for a family in Pensacola, and incidentally, he was on the disaster preparedness committee and was in the emergency shelter when Ivan came ashore, but his whole house disappeared. When he came back, there was nothing there. So the debate raged, well, what caused it to disappear? Was it flood or was it wind? And through a long, protracted process, we were able to establish that, well, number one, he would get policy limits for flood because the whole surrounding area was damaged. But we also made a case that that house was severely damaged before the flood happened, so that everything above the flood line, we got covered under the wind policy. So these are very challenging issues and hotly debated in hurricanes and situations like that.
And proves how useful a public adjuster like you can be in situations like this. Okay, for more property claim advice, you can visit publicadjuster.com/claim tips or call 800-321-4488. Dick Tutwiler, thank you very much for coming in today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Daytime will be right back.